When you think of the year 2016, there's probably a lot of things that come to mind. You probably think of some of the most popular trends like the bottle flip, Pokemon Go, you think of the NBA Finals from that year, dabbing, Harambe, the mannequin challenge, and some pretty awesome music. 2016 is a year that is filled with nostalgia, filled with different things that took off, and for so many of us, when we see the numbers 2016, they remind us of simpler times, times that we wish we enjoyed just a little bit more. And to make things even better, we had the WWE. WWE in this year was a year of two halves. The first half seemed rather average, and then when the summertime came, WWE went full flight and they never looked back. They never looked back, but it's time for us to take a look back at one of the most beloved years in WWE's history. Let's go back, take a look at all the moments, the matches, and the fun of WWE in 2016. Where else can we begin a retrospective of this year than the Royal Rumble, where it was one versus all? Roman Reigns having to defend his world title in the Royal Rumble match, and this was when they were trying to make Roman Reigns into Daniel Bryan 2.0 by having the Authority hold him back, and it didn't work. You guys all remember everything? I don't need to tell you. Roman didn't end up winning this match. Instead, it was Triple H who returned to in-ring action, won the WWE title on the road to WrestleMania. Triple H is of course known as the Game, but the biggest game changer in this match wasn't him. It was the man who entered at number 3, AJ Styles. The man who defined TNA wrestling for the better part of the 2000s, a world-renowned performer, one of the best overall competitors on the face of the planet, and now he was with the WWE. What we didn't know is just how much of a revelation he would become in the WWE. He came in, he had rivalries with Chris Jericho, who he formed a tag team with, eventually leading to a WrestleMania match. He feuded with Roman for the WWE title, and of course, the premier rivalry of 2016 in the WWE against John Cena. We'll come back to John Cena and AJ Styles in a bit, but we gotta talk about this roster and just how depleted it was heading into WrestleMania season. Rollins injured, Cena injured. Well, unfortunately, another fan favorite had to retire right before the show. Daniel Bryan, after fighting an uphill battle with injuries and being unable to get cleared, retired from in-ring action in one of the most emotional moments in WWE history. We all remember that night in Bryan's home state of Washington where, similar to Edge a few years back, Bryan left with tears in his eyes, and this crowd was just rabid for him. It was the perfect way for him to go out, and it looked like this was it. But as one performer left, another returned. Just a few weeks later, on the February 22nd episode of Raw, Stephanie McMahon was about to receive an achievement award, and right then and there, here came the money. Shane McMahon, after 7 years away from the WWE, was back. Everyone was in pure disbelief. No rumor, no leaks, no sighting, just an organic and crowd-shocking return. Shane was back and he said that he wanted control of Monday Night Raw. He told everyone that he and Vince cut a business deal, and Vince said, alright, you can have control of Raw if you beat one opponent on one night in one match. And that opponent was The Undertaker. That one night was WrestleMania, and that one match was inside Hell in a Cell. WWE fans were gearing up for Mania 32, and the previous year's WrestleMania was one of the best shows that WWE has ever put on. The question was, how would WWE follow up WrestleMania 31 with an encore? Big shows such as WrestleMania, the Royal Rumble, and SummerSlam all used to be accompanied with an NXT takeover on the night before, and we gotta talk about NXT a little bit. 2016 was one of the best years in that brand's history. 2015 was the year where NXT took a step into becoming a global brand. Well, the next year, they made a leap into becoming the wrestling connoisseur's choice of a promotion in North America. They made a statement by signing one of the biggest talents outside of WWE. That, of course, was Shinsuke Nakamura, in a move that I don't know how many people really expected when that year begun. I'd be remiss if I said Nakamura and I didn't talk about TakeOver Dallas. I've been to 2 takeovers myself, and I assure you that there is nothing like an NXT takeover. The atmosphere, the insane matches. But on this night when Shinsuke Nakamura met Sami Zayn, it felt like you were witnessing something generational. One of the most electric and jaw-dropping matches ever. These two, in what can only be described as a 20-minute masterclass, went back and forth, and with Sami Zayn leaving for the main roster, Nakamura got the win. What these two did on this night was nothing short of legendary. The pacing of the match, the entrances, an insane crowd. This was peak Nakamura, and he hasn't hit these heights since. And for NXT, the heights that they were about to see were all thanks to 2016. Finn Balor, one of NXT's biggest stars ever, would leave come the summer. Well, that wasn't any problem for the brand. Samoa Joe, Asuka, Bobby Roode, DIY all started to make NXT their shows, and it was awesome because NXT became its own entity. It wasn't linked to the main roster. Everything had reasoning, everything made sense. But what stood out the most were the matches. Revival versus American Alpha, Asuka versus Bayley, Samoa Joe and Finn Balor multiple times at TakeOver just killed it. But it was the final TakeOver of this year where people remember one of the best masterclasses in tag team wrestling. DIY versus the Revival. TakeOver Toronto, 2 out of 3 falls for the NXT tag team titles. Here was where two underdogs finally got their moment. This show also saw the return of Mickie James, and what NXT did this year was nothing short of spectacular. So that's some shine on NXT, but this year is not entirely NXT's. This year belonged to the main roster, in which can only be described as a year of two halves. The first half basically gave us the setup for the second half and everything that would come in the summer. And we also had one of the most middling WrestleManias of all time. I'd even go as far to say one of the worst probably. I don't remember much good coming out of this show. The show started off with a great 7-man ladder match and Zack Ryder getting a huge underdog win. And then later in the show, we got one of the biggest duds in WWE history. Brock Lesnar versus Dean Ambrose. They were building this thing up like something big was about to happen. Like these two were gonna slug things out in a match full of weapons and near falls and carnage. Mick Foley was even involved. He was looking to pass the torch to Dean Ambrose as this next hardcore type wrestler. But instead, Brock didn't want to risk injury as he had a UFC return looming in the summer. Lesnar dominated Ambrose and Lesnar won. Well, we went from a dud to, I'd say, an all-time classic women's match. Sasha Banks, Charlotte, and Becky Lynch for the new WWE Women's Championship. In 2015, WWE made its plans for the women evident. No more divas, no more filler matches, no more casting them aside. They wanted to give them equal opportunity, and that's what they got. For 15 minutes, this match was a thriller. From the entrances to the moves to the near falls, this one ended with Charlotte tapping out Becky Lynch and ushering in a new era in women's wrestling. For Shane McMahon though, there was nothing new era about him on this show. His fetish for consistently falling off high things continued when he jumped 20 feet off the Hell in a Cell onto the announce table. But in the end, Undertaker got the win, so it looked like Shane wasn't going to get control of Raw after all. This was also the show where The Rock competed in a match, believe it or not. He came out, he made a crazy entrance, and then he was confronted by the Wyatt family, only to take on Rowan and in 6 seconds get the win. Alright Rock, if you're watching, see that name? Rowan? Yeah, turn that W around. See how it says Roman? Yeah, there you go, that's what we want at WrestleMania 39. Cena also came out, they fought off the Wyatts. This was a cool moment. And then in the main event, Triple H versus Roman Reigns for the WWE title. This was really long. It felt like it went on forever, but anyone could see it from a mile away. Reigns was gonna get his moment. They'd been building him up, and that's what happened. Triple H only came back to put over Roman, so that was WrestleMania. And after this, things just turned around and the WWE slowly started to heat up, which I didn't expect after this show. The following night, Shane was given control of Monday Night Raw as a one-off, and at the end of the night, Cesaro returned to the WWE and we had a crazy #1 contenders match. AJ Styles, Chris Jericho, Kevin Owens, and Cesaro. And you know how I said we'd get back to AJ in a bit? Well, at WrestleMania 32, he lost his match against Chris Jericho, and for many wrestling fans, it was worrying, like, oh shit, it's that classic trope. If Vince didn't create something, he's gonna destroy it. But to the surprise of many, AJ was factored into their plans big time. He won this fatal 4-way match and he became the #1 contender to Reigns' WWE title. Meanwhile, Enzo and Cass made their WWE debut, and this tag team, to me anyways, felt like they were gonna usher in a new era of tag team wrestling. Like, I thought, these are the guys that you build around. These guys are gonna do something special because you had Enzo. Enzo could talk his way out of anything and he was just charismatic. Then there was Cass, who was the perfect big guy to accompany Enzo. And unfortunately, they fizzled out after this year. In fact, they didn't even win a tag team title, which is shocking considering just how talented the team was. But who did win a title was The Miz. He beat Zack Ryder on the Raw after Mania, and I didn't realize just how long he held it for. We'll get back to that in a bit, but Miz's 2016 and what he was able to do with the Intercontinental Championship was one of WWE's biggest bright spots. It's about what you can do in the time you have, and when Miz was on, he told everybody, I'm the workhorse of this company, and this is the workhorse title. Watch me. That, of course, is the mid-card title, but the main title was the WWE World Heavyweight Championship, which Roman and Styles competed for at Payback in a great match with AJ taking a loss. In this was the thread of the club helping AJ. Was AJ with the club? Wasn't AJ with the club? So we got a rematch at the following pay-per-view, Extreme Rules, in which we had an Ambrose Asylum match, but we don't need to talk about that. An oftentimes forgotten match on this Extreme Rules card is Cesaro, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, and The Miz for the IC title. This match's rewatch value is amazing. Again, it's so lost in this year of phenomenal matches. End of the night, Reigns and Styles main event, and they tore the house down. It was a fantastic Extreme Rules match with Roman cutting AJ in half and getting the win. So for AJ, he needed to regroup after this. But instead of regrouping, there was a dude who simply needed to rebuild, redesign, and reclaim. And that man was Seth Rollins, who returned after the Styles and Reigns match, and this was such a fantastic return. Shocked everyone, brought everyone out of their seats, and it brought everything full circle. See, for Seth Rollins, his ascent in 2014 and 2015 was probably one of the best laid out plans ever. Turn on the Shield, win the Money in the Bank, have a great run while holding it, give us the cash in of a lifetime, and then have a title reign where he felt relevant. He took on big challengers, but when he landed on the instep of his left knee, he had to vacate the WWE title without losing it. During this time, he won people over, and fans missed Rollins even though this man ruined the Shield, but he had solidified himself as one of the best. Now he was back for what he never lost. So that was the plan for Rollins, but for AJ, he turned his sights to a returning John Cena. After 6 months away and shoulder surgery, Cena was back. Two worlds collided the night AJ Styles introduced himself to John Cena. He also introduced him to his fists in a perfectly executed heel turn, and what we got next was one of the best WWE rivalries ever. It really gave me shades of HBK and Angle back in 2005, two guys who each time they met, from the promos to the energy of the crowd, their wording and how they made you buy in, and of course the eventual matches, did way more than deliver each and every time. And that's so cool to me, is how they got so many of us invested. No championships, no underhanded tactics for the most part, just straight, I'm better than you and here's why. This shaped a very nice Money in the Bank card, and I think this show just doesn't get the praise. Everyone always talks about 2011 and how amazing this was. Well, go watch this one back. I think you might change your opinion. AJ and Cena had chemistry right off the bat. Both guys told a fantastic story in the ring of not wanting to surrender to the other because they believed they were better than the other competitor. But with the help of the club, AJ got the win over Cena. Dean Ambrose won the Money in the Bank contract. Alright, cool. Wonder what's gonna happen now. And then at the end of the night, it was Rollins versus Roman. These two, 4 minutes shy of half an hour, slugged things out with counters upon counters. They told the story of basically being brothers and having each other scouted really well. At the end of it, Seth Rollins won back his WWE title, but right then and there, a ghost of his past would come back to haunt him. The other dude who he hit in the back with a chair, Dean Ambrose, cashed in his Money in the Bank and captured his first WWE title, bringing everything full circle. All three members of the Shield were WWE champion on the same night, so we all knew what this could potentially lead to, the Shield triple threat match, and that was coming at the next pay-per-view. And here's what you guys have all been waiting for, the brand split. In May of 2016, WWE announced that they'd be having exclusive rosters for both Raw and SmackDown, and that SmackDown would be moving away from pre-tapes and air live on Tuesdays. See, the past couple of years, things had gotten pretty muddy for both Raw and SmackDown. The two shows didn't have a defined roster, and once the titles were merged in late 2013, Raw became the A show and SmackDown just became Raw Fallout. But now the company thought it was the right time to make a change. AJ and Cena continued their rivalry, the Wyatts feuded with the New Day. You guys remember when XXX Xavier Woods was possessed? The Shield continued their build to Battleground. On July 19th, the WWE draft came around, and in the draft pool was the perfect mix of stars. You had vets like Orton, Cena, Lesnar, and Jericho, the new school with Reigns, Rollins, Ambrose, and Owens, and then some new faces by WWE standards like AJ Styles, and picks were made from NXT as well. But before that, we had our GMs and commissioners decided. Vince named each show's commissioners, and the commissioners would select a GM. It was going to be brother versus sister. Stephanie had Raw, and oddly enough, the man who wanted control on Mondays instead got Tuesday nights and Smackdown. And with their general managers, both of them picked legends. Steph took Mick Foley, and for Shane, his choice was Daniel Bryan. After Bryan retired in February, he was back with an on-screen role with the WWE, and it was amazing to see. Little did we know that the pairing of Shane and Daniel Bryan would become legendary. Then came the draft. SmackDown seemingly loaded up with the perfect mix of veterans and then some exciting prospects from NXT. They took AJ Styles, John Cena, Randy Orton, Bray Wyatt, American Alpha, Becky Lynch, and Alexa Bliss. But when it was all said and done, many believed that they had the weaker roster compared to Raw. Raw took the likes of Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Sasha Banks, Finn Balor, and Charlotte. But before things got underway and this new era was ushered in, we had Battleground with the most obvious WrestleMania main event in history. The Shield triple threat. After Money in the Bank, the WWE champion was still Dean Ambrose, who was drafted to SmackDown, and with both shows now having exclusive rosters, the WWE title could only go to one show, either to SmackDown with Ambrose or what seemed like the likely option to Raw with Roman or Seth. That would be decided at Battleground, which when I play this has to bring back some nostalgia. On that same show, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn did what they always do. They showed up and they showed out. They showed us that no matter the show, no matter the situation, when these two are paired up together, they will kill it. And then in the main event, Dean Ambrose retained his WWE title. Look how annoyed the Usos look. Like, Roman didn't win? No. So now the WWE title was gone to SmackDown and it left Raw without a champion. This, of course, began the build to SummerSlam, and I don't know about you guys, but Summer 16 was amazing even without the WWE. This just made it that much better. Raw was left without a title, and they introduced the Universal Championship, which I honestly thought would look something like the North American title, you know, Universe, Globe, but it was just a red version. Both shows got brand new intros and brand new stages. Enemies kicking off Raw, which was so perfect. It gave Raw that gritty feel that it had in the early to mid 2000s. So Raw pulled the trigger on Finn Balor right away. They had him beat Roman Reigns to contend for the Universal title at SummerSlam against the #1 overall pick, Seth Rollins. Meanwhile, Roman took a step away from the main event scene and instead competed in the mid-card. The women, on the other hand, well, this began a back and forth hot potato passing of the women's title on Raw between Sasha and Charlotte. They had some amazing matches, but it did become pretty tiresome. And then the match that was set to headline SummerSlam, Brock Lesnar versus Randy Orton. This felt like it was going to be something colossal. This felt like the world was going to explode. This felt like two guys were going to give us an absolute war. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Raw also brought back the Cruiserweights to fill all your high-flying, high-octane, edge-of-your-seat needs. This started with the Cruiserweight Classic, a 32-man tournament with stars from all over the world. Guys like Zack Sabre Jr., Kota Ibushi, to guys who were already on NXT like Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, and even Tajiri came back. This tournament gave us some insane wrestling matches. I think back to Rich Swann versus TJP, Gargano versus Ciampa, Cedric Alexander versus Kota Ibushi. Man, that first round was just amazing. I remember when Cedric lost that match, the crowd chanted, "Please sign Cedric," until Triple H finally came out and gave him a contract. I think some of us have forgotten just how fun wrestling-wise that tournament was. The winner of this tournament would of course be TJ Perkins, winning the Cruiserweight title, and following this, WWE would bring the Cruiserweights to Raw as part of the brand split because they needed 3 hours to fill. Why not have some exciting high-flying action? Then you had Braun Strowman, who was drafted away from the Wyatt family, and in a couple months, they made him feel like a huge deal. They were having him in squash matches on the weekly, and he was slowly rising and rising. It looked like he was gonna be something huge. On the flip side, you had Smackdown, which coined themselves as the land of opportunity, and it's crazy just how much fun this show was. SmackDown Live is missed by so many people. It was the quintessential wrestling show. Everything had a purpose. It had good in-ring action, the storylines were fresh, the characters were fleshed out, and before it even started, it was over. Every week leaving fans wanting more and waiting until the next Tuesday. I still remember that first SmackDown Live with Shane and Daniel Bryan in the ring and all the superstars surrounding them, a new aesthetic and a new era for the show. For the SmackDown side of SummerSlam, the world title match was going to be between Ziggler and Ambrose, and of course John Cena and AJ Styles, who continued to verbally assault each other. So SummerSlam comes, it starts off with a bromance of Jericho and KO, who we'll get to in a bit. And this was just such a fun-filled variety show. AJ Styles and John Cena stole the show with the match of the night. This late into his career, AJ Styles brought out a new side of John Cena and it was amazing. Finn Balor became the first ever Universal Champion in a classic with Seth Rollins. Sasha and Charlotte had a good match. Ambrose retained his WWE title, and then to end the night, Brock Lesnar left Randy Orton in a pool of blood in one of the most confusing yet at the same time believable matches. I know a lot of people coming into this were expecting something big, so was I, but upon a rewatch, I actually really enjoy this match. And then after SummerSlam, things really began for both Raw and SmackDown. Let's start off with the Raw side. Finn Balor had to vacate the Universal title a day after he won it, and it was there where a fatal 4-way was set up for that same Universal title. And this match was nothing short of spectacular. Big Cass, Kevin Owens, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins. And I don't know how, I don't know why, but every time I watch this match, I enjoy it a little bit more. Everything you'd want from a match, from big spots to big swerves. At the end of it, it came down to Seth Rollins and Kevin Owens, and in a shocking moment, Rollins was turned on by his mentor, the man that handpicked him as the future, Triple H. Triple H hit him with a pedigree, and Kevin Owens became the WWE Universal Champion for the first time in his career. This showed that WWE was willing to give different people an opportunity, and what started after the show was a really fun slow burner for Triple H and Seth Rollins. They were going to wrestle at the following year's WrestleMania. Rollins was doing everything in his power to get payback on Triple H. Triple H, of course, wasn't showing up. He turned face, and essentially his segments, the way he spoke, his in-ring matches, 2016 Rollins was elite. He competed for the Universal title at Clash of Champions and at Hell in a Cell against Kevin Owens, and these two, much like Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, just do not miss. Jericho and Owens' bromance continued. Them taking the crap out of everyone was so funny, and somehow Chris Jericho managed to get a pen and a clipboard over. Yes, you heard that right. One of the biggest gimmicks of this year was Chris Jericho and his list of Jericho. Crowds would erupt every time he would put somebody on that list. The tag team division was alright for the most part. It wasn't anything too special. The New Day killed it, and there were some great matches and moments as well. Now we gotta talk about SmackDown Live. This show is such a comfort watch for so many people, including myself. If I need to enjoy an episode of SmackDown, I go back to either 2002, 2003, 2007 for some odd reason, or to 2016. I talked about Enemies for Raw, and it was just such a hype song to get us ready. Well, we had Left Us for Dead on SmackDown, and at first I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? How am I supposed to get excited for a show? This sounds depressing. But it all made sense. See, SmackDown was always in the shadow of Raw, even though in my opinion in the Ruthless Aggression era, SmackDown was the better and more enjoyable show on a pretty consistent basis. Maybe it's just me being blinded by nostalgia, probably, but Raw was always seen as the number one by the company. But SmackDown was always able to build from within and create something special. And something special is exactly what SmackDown Live was. At the forefront of it all was AJ Styles, who beat Dean Ambrose at the first brand exclusive pay-per-view in this new era, as WWE called it. And for the next few months, AJ Styles dominated SmackDown. He truly made that his show. The show revolved around him and his stories. He had a great rivalry with Dean Ambrose, a fantastic run with the WWE title. Honestly, I still can't wrap my mind around how quickly AJ won everything and just how well they presented him. He was able to do his thing. We had the No Mercy triple threat between Cena, Ambrose, and Styles. Styles and Ambrose at TLC was fun. Styles, Ziggler, and Corbin, another fantastic match. But for Ambrose, his WWE title reign was pretty bad in my opinion, and by year's end, he was feuding for the Intercontinental Championship, which is not a bad thing at all. So let's talk about that IC title for a second. For Miz, he was sick and tired of being cast aside. He wanted to make the Intercontinental title the #1 title. He believed he was the workhorse of the company, so he went on a tirade against Daniel Bryan for not showing him respect. What was supposed to be a dingy little interview for basically a throwaway post-Smackdown show was able to be used for WWE TV, and then we got one of the most unexpected yet equally well-executed rivalries of 2016 and the past couple of years, Dolph Ziggler and The Miz. When these two met again, people let out a verbal groan, like, not this again. But what was about to come was simply magical. These two on the weekly made it evident that this was the #1 title, that this was what you need to keep your eyes on. They made things personal to the point where Ziggler put his career on the line at No Mercy, and the match, it was epic. It gave Dolph Ziggler a huge win and an Intercontinental Championship, and this showed just how much you can do with a mid-card title if it's treated right. I touched on Talking Smack for a brief second, and this show was just fun. It was a post-Smackdown show which let characters be themselves and develop without being heavily scripted. It allowed for confrontation with the Smackdown GM Daniel Bryan, who was great in his job, but he was equally as suspect at the same time.
Remember the old Smackdown set, but there used to be a giant fist, and I was like, man, Smackdown is really into fisting. No.
Talking Smack was just a fun show. It allowed stories to begin. It had a more loose approach to interviewing. I don't remember the last time where I went to go watch a pre or post show for the WWE, but this one was can't miss. This was can't miss, and so were some other storylines on SmackDown, so let's rifle through them because I'm pretty sure I've been talking for about half an hour. Heath Slater had a storyline where he wasn't selected in the WWE draft, and they turned that into money by having Heath and Rhino become the first ever SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Heath would go to Raw and SmackDown begging for a contract. We all remember those segments. They were awesome. We had Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt, which was confusing at the time, but in retrospect, it was something enjoyable. It was something different, and when Randy Orton joined the Wyatt family, instead of just blowing it off in 2 weeks, they actually stood pat with it and let it breathe, and it was great. On the flip side, Raw had the women's title, so SmackDown introduced their own, and the winner of that title was Becky Lynch again at Backlash. Since Raw had the better women's division, this allowed for women like Alexa Bliss to get more TV time and get more shine. And because of this, she became one of the most popular wrestlers on the WWE roster. There's just so many random episodes of SmackDown that I remember. The one where Ambrose dressed up as a Mountie, the one where Cena roasted Ambrose, the one where AJ Styles got stuck on the rope, Milkman for some odd reason. I don't know, it was just such a fun show. It really did feel like no minute was wasted on this show. When a match ended, a vignette or backstage segment would air to progress another story right after it. And then when something would finish, it would perfectly bleed into whatever was next. So both Raw and SmackDown were firing on all cylinders, and that brought us to Survivor Series. And you know how nowadays they just hardcore brand the hell out of it. Oh, SmackDown hates Raw, Raw hates SmackDown. Who's gonna come out on top? Even though one guy was just on SmackDown like 6 days ago, now he's on Raw. Well, this felt like SmackDown versus Raw. Since the brand split in July, each show had crafted its own identity, and as a result, it felt like the winner of this head-to-head show would actually have bragging rights for the following year because they cared about the rivalries, they cared about what was happening on their show, they cared about bleeding their team's colors. Those segments where both shows invaded one another were flat out legendary. The confrontations to the brawls, and Survivor Series was a fantastic show. The women's match was fun for it was, the 5-on-5 traditional Survivor Series match, which lasted nearly an hour. Both teams went to war here in a match filled with insane moments like Shane getting cut in half, the Shield briefly reuniting, and so much more. This was exceptional. There's just so much to dissect in this match. SmackDown got the win. But at the end of it, after nearly 13 years away from the WWE, Goldberg was back and he took on Brock Lesnar, and he squashed him in a shock moment that I don't think many people saw coming. I certainly didn't. And that was 2016 in the WWE, just a fun, variety-filled year. I know this one went long, but I don't think I need to ever make this video again, nor will I. I talked about parts of 2016 before, and those videos were pretty awful, but this year, it wasn't. This year was fun. This year was WWE at their best. Everything had a purpose. Stories weren't just aimlessly there for the sake of filling TV time. They developed characters, and the big guys all had their own identity. In 2016, the WWE was just a fun time, particularly in the summer months with a brand split and an emphasis on all types of different characters. The year 2016 was the perfect storm. The changing of the guard, the perfect mix of new and veteran stars, a year filled with wild and unexpected moments, coherent stories, and just a refreshing take on the WWE. I could go on forever, but the in-ring work from this year is a chef's kiss. You can go back to any pay-per-view or takeover from this year and you'll find a match that you're going to enjoy all over again. For the WWE, this encapsulated the good, the great, and the beautiful of the company. Shock returns, amazing rivalries, great matches, and what would eventually become a comfort watch year for so many fans. Go back to this year, pick out a segment, match, or rivalry, and 9 times out of 10, it'll be something worthwhile. That being said, thank you for your while. Thank you for watching. It's fitting that this year was dominated by AJ Styles because this year in the WWE was nothing short of phenomenal. Thanks for watching.